Hello and welcome to Not a Buffalo, the show where we discuss the science and technosolo. Shall we keep this in, Ben?
Yeah.
We're going to discuss the science and technophilo that will save the world. So, my name's Jack, and I can't pronounce technology today. And this is Ben, and I think he could pronounce technology. So, Ben.
I'm an expert at pronouncing technology.
Technology?
I'm an expert at pronouncing tenography.
Tenography, ah.
Tenography, yeah. Technology. God, I don't get me into this habit because I've got some difficult names coming up in my stories. So you're setting me up for failure here, Jack.
I chose exclusively stories where people had like easy-ish to pronounce names, so I hope it will be okay.
I love that that's our criteria for choosing stories. I go with words I like in the title. You go with names of researchers that are easy to pronounce. There's no consideration for entertainment factor or scientific interest or just impressiveness of the story. It's purely those two criteria.
It's not like we're picking them for a show or anything.
Exactly. Why would we want consideration? This is just a chat between friends that's broadcast to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of people. That's not how many people listen, but it is technically accessible by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of people. So, Jack, what's your first story?
It's a cool new technology known as the Hyperloop, which is not that new.
Damn it! I had this story too!
Oh, oops.
I knew you
sorry.
were going to see it. No, it's okay. I've got spare stories.
Cool, that's good. I went with like the most popular story first, and I'll go with the second most popular, I think. I don't know. But yeah, can I scoop more than one story from Ben? That is the question. So, the Virgin Hyperloop has been tested.
That's actually all this podcast is a test of how alike can two people think where they end up picking all the exact same stories.
Yeah. It ends with us merging into the singularity. Romantic, right? So, the Virgin Hyperloop has been tested with people for the first time. So, they put people in one of their pods, and they sent the pod very fast down a track. So, it's maybe worth explaining a little bit about what a Hyperloop is. There are a few different designs, but what they all have in common is that they are sealed tubes, which operate in a partial, not complete vacuum, and then they are propelled along by some means that's not wheels. So it'll be something like maglev technology.
Magnetic levitation.
Yeah, there was an early design for it was a little bit like a hockey table, actually. So there was a very thin layer of air at the bottom of the tube.
Okay.
It suspended the pod above on that and used some kind of air pushing system, air injection system, I think, or possibly a partial maglev system with like sort of pulsed relays along the sides to push it along. That's the update on the Virgin Hyperloop.
Richard Branson's Virgin bought a company which bought another company which started building the Hyperloop. Yeah, I mean, it got up to 100 miles per hour, I think, but in theory it could go up to 760 miles per hour.
I know it's like 1,200 kilometers.
Oh, yeah, sorry, correct system. Yeah, 1,200 kilometers an hour.
I was going to say, I have no idea what 700 miles means.
I think that's about 17 hamsters per second.
Hamsters?
Oh, it could be houses. Maybe I misheard that. Maybe it is.
I don't know. A hamster tends to travel faster than a house if you throw it.
No, I just meant the length of the hamster. It travels the length of the hamster.
Oh, yes, that's far more humane. You're right.
But anyway, yeah, I mean, the Hyperloop is fascinating because they're kind of pitching this as the potential solution to transportation issues. Like, in theory, you could build one. I think Elon Musk famously said you'd build one between San Francisco and Los Angeles and be able to make the journey in 30 minutes, whereas I understand it takes significantly longer. In fact, I think you fly between San Francisco and Los Angeles at the moment, which boggles the mind coming from a place that is not as big as California or the United States of America. Like, having to fly within your own country is just weird to me.
I think it's odd to a lot of Europeans because like the scale of the US is just vast. This Hyperloop isn't following the San Francisco to wherever the other place was.
But it's only a test track at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. The track they tested it on was a lot smaller than that, but that's the proposed route that Virgin Hyperloop want to reach eventually. Which is cool. It allows people to get out of Vegas, which is important.
I have to admit, I'm not convinced. Having looked more into the Hyperloop technology, I'm not convinced by it, really. Because I don't understand why you'd build it instead of building a bullet train like they have in Japan or in China, a magnetic levitating train that can... I know the Hyperloop can hit 700 miles per hour. Like the pods can only transport very few people, and it just seems the cost would be... Because it's new technology and everything... Like bullet trains are expensive to build. To build a bullet train between San Francisco and Los Angeles would cost billions, but a Hyperloop would be just as expensive. And if you wanted to carry as many people per hour as a bullet train, then you're probably looking at significantly more expensive. So I'm just not sure really what the advantages are. Like, it could be slightly faster, but it still only be... It means that a few very wealthy people could move places much faster. But it is a very cool story. Like, the idea of traveling in a kind of pod, magnetically levitating pod, whistling through at 700 miles an hour would be quite cool. 1,200 kilometers an hour, sorry.
Yeah, it's a great idea. But yeah, that's my first story. What's your first segue?
I don't have a segue. I actually don't have a segue at all.
This is a first.
I know.
I don't understand.
My stories have anything to do with Hyperloops or anything.
Apart from your story that was the Hyperloop, right?
Apart from my story, there was the Hyperloop. That's what's completely thrown me. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
You were the one who's meant to segue from the Hyperloop.
We could break format for I have a segue into another story.
No, we can't break the format, Jack. This is a tried and tested format over 19 episodes now. No, I actually have I'm going to go with the computerized tomography story.
Oh.
Mainly because I think the introduction to this is kind of hilarious because I am a child. Bioimaging technologies are the eyes that allow doctors to see inside the body in order to diagnose, treat, and monitor disease. Guy Wang, an endowed professor of biomedical engineering... Sorry. I tried so hard. It made me laugh every time.
That's such a weird way to start describing somebody.
I purposefully have the article open and not looking at you, and I still laugh my head off just knowing you were there.
That's amazing.
I'm not even sure if an endowed professor is a thing. Like,
is this a translated article or something?
It's from the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, which is in New York. So no, it's not.
Okay. Okay, to maybe get us back onto track.
Okay, so yeah, I'll start again.
No, it's okay. We can talk about tomography. Tomography's fun.
Tomography is, as I said, essentially how doctors look inside the body. Things like MRIs. Well, it kind of covers everything. So it's things like X-rays. I mean, they call it CT scans for short, kind of covers quite a wide range of things, but things like X-rays, like MRIs, anything that allows you to see inside the body.
Yeah.
These researchers from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute have discovered that they can apply a deep learning algorithm to conventional computerized tomography, so essentially to an X-ray and other kind of results that you get from these kind of scans, and it actually gives them a lot more information than they would otherwise. So you can apply it, so it's basically a much cheaper way of getting information from a single spectrum X-ray without having to put a patient through a much more expensive or much more complicated or much more time consuming test. So what conventional CT scans do is they essentially produce images that show the shape of tissues within the body, and they kind of give you a grayscale image. So I'm sure a lot of us are probably familiar with X-rays and what they look like, but this using this kind of deep learning neural network, they're able to produce much more complex images that you typically only get from what they call a dual energy CT imaging, which, as I said, is just a much more expensive, much more complicated scanner.
That's really cool.
Yeah, like a deep learning algorithm is something you can easily send to hospitals that maybe don't have as much or even any of this more advanced equipment, and then doctors can get a much better look inside the body instead.
I have one request.
Okay.
You've mentioned deep learning algorithm. So I'd really like you to just say the name of the institute again, but with a Russian accent.
Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute.
So good. Ben has a beard at the moment, and it looks even better when he's saying.
I'm sorry, I just have to read this out. So the researchers on this paper were Wenxiang Kong, Yan Ji, Paul Fitzgerald, Bruno de Man, and Guy Wang.
Is Guy Wang the endowed professor?
He is, yeah.
Of course he is. Of course he is.
That's definitely someone snuck that in, knowing that the publisher or the editor wouldn't see it or wouldn't realise, and did it for a laugh. And there's like us and 12 people who read the paper are laughing their heads off every time.
Yeah.
But I think it's a really cool story.
We should do more of that because that's like our audience, isn't it? I joke, we have a bigger audience than that. Amazingly.
What do you mean amazingly? How dare you say amazingly?
Oh, I always find it very gratifying and kind of like amazing that anybody listens to us. So the fact that we've like developed a platform, even though it's a very small platform, is kind of cool.
Yeah, definitely. So what's your next story, Jack?
Yeah, so my next story segues really nicely from this because it also involves CT scans and tomography. But that's not really what we're there for.
Okay.
Because the CT scans were just sort of incidental to the story. Because this is the story that scientists have discovered a new organ. After 300 years-ish of no one discovering any new organs, they've discovered a new organ. Yeah. Like a human organ.
Okay. Elaborate? Like you mean like a human organ as in a body part inside us, not a
musical instrument
piano.
Inside us. Yeah.
No. Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
No, it's not. No. Epidemic of tiny organs constantly playing Blackpool Pier tunes. It's a new human gland that's been discovered. It's a salivary gland, so it produces saliva, which is pretty integral to the way our digestive system works and getting stuff to move through it. So there are 3 other salivary glands that we know of. Who knows? There might be more. But yeah, there's one that's just below the tongue, one that sits below the jaw, and there's one that sort of sits just in front of the ears but like inside the head, and that's where the 3 that we know about are. This one is located where the nasal cavity meets the throat. Now,
okay,
how it evaded anatomists and scientists for hundreds of years, nobody seems completely sure.
Are we sure they weren't just like looking at Jerry, the guy who spent too much time near the nuclear power plant?
No, it's been confirmed in multiple patients. They've published a paper on it in what's it called, Radiography and Oncology, which is a pretty big journal in the field. It's known as the Green Journal. It's one of those where they just like they go by color or by just the word science or the word nature, and everyone's all like, oh yes, of course you're a proper journal if you don't stick to your name. But yeah, it's kind of cool. It was discovered in the Netherlands at a cancer research institute. Where they were testing a new type of CT scan, which is why I was like, that's the perfect segue from your story. It's a CT, so it's a sort of does a lot of the body, and they were testing something where they do it in combination with some kind of radioactive tracer, and they ran it under this scan, and they just went, what are those things on the scan? And yeah, on closer examination, there's a pair of salivary glands back there that we've all been happily walking around with, and nobody knew.
That's amazing. And does this have any? Does this have any implications for? Obviously, it improves our understanding of the human body now and everything. But does it have any further implications than that? Is this something that scientists, should be paying more attention to?
I think certainly it has implications for anatomy textbooks.
Oh yeah.
Because now they're going to have to be updated for the first time in however long. I thought it was so landmark that I was just like, this. We've got to talk about this on the show. That's my second story.
I love that, and it just shows the importance of science. That we can often feel like we've figured out everything there is to figure out, and something as basic as the human body, the thing inside ourselves we didn't even know. We didn't even have that sussed yet.
Oh, just one more. The lead author on this is someone with a great name, Matthijs H. Falstar.
That is a cool name. Hello, Mr. Falstar.
Yeah.
Dr. Falstar.
I know, right?
That's a superhero or supervillain. I'm not quite sure which.
Yeah.
Probably whatever he chooses. It's really useful to do tissue grafts very quickly.
I have been looking for a way to increase the speed of my tissue grafting. Ben, tell me, how can I increase the speed of my tissue grafting?
Tissue grafts are essentially, if you have a wound on your body, for example, a burn is a good example of this, then doctors will often apply a cell or a sheet of cells or a sheet of tissue, of body tissue, to that in order to help treat it. And this has been developing a lot more in the last few decades as we develop kind of stem cells and are able to grow artificially tissues and things that we can then transplant onto people to help them recover from wounds. but it's really difficult because, as you can imagine, sometimes they have to do incredibly thin like single layers of skin at a time to make sure that it's transplanted on correctly, and that's very fragile. It's very difficult,
and not to mention time consuming. I spend ages grafting skin.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, typically to do this, you'd need technicians, highly skilled technicians, who can still tear or wrinkle it. No, you do, honestly, Jack. I know you're a kind of self-taught amateur prodigy, but most of the time you need skilled technicians, and it can take 30 to 60 minutes to transfer a single sheet. And so what these researchers at the University of Urbana-Champaign, at the University of Illinois, decided to do was go to the aquarium, where they spotted an octopus.
I love octopuses.
I don't actually know how this came about. I always love to picture how these amazing advancements came about. But essentially, they realized that they could copy what an octopus does, because an octopus is very good at picking up wet and dry things with the suckers on their tentacles with enormous delicacy and precision. And they realized that they're able to apply this to picking up these very thin sheets of cells, or even they've been able to apply it to electronics as well, for very thin layers of silicon and electronics.
Like graphene, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So they designed a manipulator made of temperature-responsive hydrogel, attached that to an electric heater, and it can pick up these thin sheets and transplant them onto patients. And it takes about 10 seconds as opposed to 60 minutes, which is just incredible.
Yeah.
And much more accurate, much less likely to tear or damage the skin or the tissue transplant. And they're now looking at developing it further by integrating pressure sensors, for example, so that they can kind of monitor the target object when they're putting the skin cell or the electronics down. But it's a really incredible thing, and just another example of how, we can try and think of really complicated ways of doing things, but sometimes the answer just is right there in nature, and it's already, evolution's already figured it out and done it much better than we ever could imagine.
Nature's pretty cool. Tell me more about this hydrogel, the temperature sensitive hydrogel. I don't really know what a hydrogel is.
I don't either, unfortunately. It doesn't go into a lot of detail in the sheet, but I think it's kind of like a gelatinous substance, I think. And basically it reacts to heat. They heat the hydrogel using this heater, and that shrinks the hydrogel, press that to the sheet, and then they turn off the heat and the hydrogel expands again slightly, and that creates suction on the soft tissue, and then they move along, and then they can turn the heater back on, which again shrinks the hydrogel and releases the sheet. So it's probably the best way to think of it in this case is it's quite similar to an octopus sucker. I don't know if you have first-hand experience of that, but you've probably seen one on at an aquarium or a cartoon or something.
Yeah. That is another really cool story, and really like upbeat, sort of sunny, which is quite nice, because my next story is also about sun, or the lack of sun. It's about seasonal affective disorder, Norway, and the Norwegian town of Tromsø.
Tromsø. I've heard of Tromsø.
Tromsø. Yeah, I hadn't. What have you heard of Tromsø?
That it's isn't it a very northerly town in Norway? That's probably all I've heard about it, and doesn't get much sunlight.
Yeah, it's one of those very, very extreme places where they have, I think it's 2 months or something like that without any sun each year, which you'd think, if you're going to study seasonal affective disorder, that's a pretty good place to start, right?
Yeah, I mean, as a clue to our listeners again, I don't live in Tromsø.
Dun, dun, dun.
Where I do live, we get more sun than that, but still not very much. And obviously being inside a lot more with lockdowns and restrictions and things, I'm definitely feeling the lack of sunlight. So that can't be fun, living in Tromsø.
I think we should just whittle off places where we don't live, literally working on populations of a few hundred. Like we should start with the smallest villages.
And we've eliminated Tromsø.
Tromsø, yeah. But yes, back to Tromsø. It's a great place to study seasonal affective disorder, and that's why Carrie Leibowitz, a PhD candidate from Stanford University in the US, went off to Norway for several months, because lots of people in much sunnier climates suffer seasonal affective disorder, which is just to touch on that for a moment, is a disorder where you get very, very low because of a lack of sunlight. Some people think it's linked to a lack of vitamin D. Other people think it's completely psychological, or it's just to do with the absence of sunlight. But this new study that she's published looks at mindset as a way of combating seasonal affective disorder, and she found that actually, if you expect a lot of darkness, the symptoms are drastically reduced.
But I imagine the people of Tromsø have been there for a while, so are they not expecting there not to be any sun for a while?
Oh no, they are, and the people of Tromsø don't really suffer from seasonal affective disorder anymore. Than anywhere else.
Right.
That's what I probably should have clarified that. But yeah, that's why it's an interesting place to study it, right?
Yeah. Did she try somewhere really grim though, like Skarsvåg, because that's also a place we don't live. But that may also.
Oh, where's Skarsvåg? I feel like your Norwegian geography is much better than mine.
No, I've got Google Maps open in front of me. It's a village even further north. It looks like the most northern village in the Norwegian mainland, not including Svalbard. I mean, that could be even worse. You could go to Svalbard, where we also... I mean, that's quite a big island, so I'm not going to rule that out yet. We may live in Svalbard. We will go through village by village and rule those out, but for now, I'll just say we don't live in Skarsvåg.
You don't want to rule out the full island, do you?
Exactly. So we may live in Svalbard, but we will let you know village by village.
Well, one of us may live in Svalbard, because I think we've let on that we live in different countries, haven't we?
I believe so.
Yeah.
That could be a double bluff, but who knows?
You know what it could be? I hadn't thought of that.
I mean, we obviously know.
That was the story.
I bet the people of Tromsø are very good at pulling together and working together, and I bet they don't deal well with cheaters. Or don't take kindly to cheaters, I should say.
Okay.
My third and final story is a study into what is known as mutualisms, which are basically interactions between species that are mutually beneficial for each species. So a good example is flowers and bees, so plants and pollinators.
Ben and mankind.
I mean, I'm not a species in and of myself. Well, I've not been classified as such just yet. I'm trying.
You'll get there. I believe in you.
I'll get there eventually. So a team of researchers from the College of Arts and Sciences at Syracuse University basically wanted to look into the question of mutualisms and whether bigger mutualistic networks are better. And within this context, cheaters are species that steal the benefits of the mutualism without providing anything in return. So, for example, there's this thing called nectar-robbing bees.
That's a great name for a species. Can we is that the name of a species or?
Yeah, literally the name of the species, nectar-robbing bees. They just sound a bit... To be honest, I don't understand how these evolved, but they chew through the side of flowers and feed on the nectar from underneath, and so they don't come into contact with the pollen, and therefore don't pollinate anything when they leave. They found that actually, when you get these kind of cheating species, you tend to see mutualistic networks grow, and they found that the networks that have more species within a mutualism, so for example... say a type of flower having lots of different species of bees, or maybe having bees and hummingbirds and lots of other animals and things that can pollinate it, tend to be much more successful. And they're starting to look at whether this applies kind of across the board to all mutualistic networks. They've basically been looking into these large networks of mutualists, and what they've concluded so far is that by having more and more species within a network, that the network benefits, and that bringing in more is more beneficial, even if there are cheaters involved in there. But I have to admit, they did it in kind of what I seem isn't a boring way, because yeast is amazing, but they basically grew. I was not expecting as big a laugh there.
Yeast is amazing. You didn't think you weren't gonna get a laugh for that. Not a boring way, because yeast is amazing.
It makes beer and bread and cinnamon rolls. But yeah, they engineered 4 species of yeast that basically engineer essential food resources and can trade between each other, which sounds...
That's cool. That's really cool.
But they also engineered 2 cheetah strains that were unable to make their own food resources, so they just basically stole the food resources from others. And then they did them in kind of different combinations, so whether to have 10 lots of the 4 different mutualist groups and then 1 cheater in there, and they did different numbers and things. And yeah, they basically found that communities with higher numbers of mutualist species were better able to withstand the negative effects of the cheaters in there. So unfortunately, it's not saying that the cheaters didn't prosper, but the overall community did better when more people got involved and didn't cheat, essentially, which I think is just a really nice story. And to see it happen in something so basic as yeast, or in bees and flowers, is really cool.
Yeah, I love the idea of developing a network of yeasts that work together. I feel like that is a project that we should all be picking up in our homes during the thing that's keeping us in our homes at the moment.
I think that's it. And you've given us all your stories as well?
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about the wintry one. because there was a bit I didn't mention, which is a thing called the winter mindset scale, which is the way that she measures this, like, having a good vibe towards winter. But yeah, it's this thing called the winter mindset scale, which essentially is that you focus on the good things about winter, like, I think winter is a beautiful time of year, rather than I dislike the winter time. I love the coziness of the winter months. Means you'll suffer from seasonal affective disorder a lot less than I am much more tired during winter.
I can see that. I like winter. I'm a fan. I like winter clothes, and I like Christmas, and I like, for some reason, I always get a really strong preference for stouts and ales during winter as well, and I like making pies, and
it's the weather for them, isn't it? It really is the weather for them.
I like making stodgy, comforting food. I quite enjoy winter. I mean, I don't see the sun now anyway, so I just get all the benefits of winter but none of the downsides, because I'm not used to the sun anymore.
There are days, to be sure, if you're living somewhere that doesn't have sun all the time. There are days, to be sure, when you're just like, oh man, I could really use with seeing the sun for more than 6 hours today. But I mean, that's not really an issue for me.
Is it time?
Yeah, I think it is that time. So
Harlage, host knowledge.
I like how the theme tune it jumps about a little bit, doesn't it?
That's because I have no sense of pitch or tone or rhythm or melody or basically anything musical whatsoever. So
we are going to play the empathy game, which is available at all good toy stores. # not a sponsor. And I am going to roll a dice. It will tell us which card we should pick, and then I will ask Ben the question on that card, and he will answer, and then he will also hear my answer when I answer, and I will hear his when he answers, and then I will answer, and he will hear. Yeah, we've looped. Okay, so I'm going to roll the dice within audio.
It's my favourite noise.
So the question is, when did you feel different from other kids?
All the time. If people haven't picked this up by now, then all the time. I was always a weirdo. Always. And in weird ways as well, if that makes sense. I think most people would look at me now and say I'm reasonably skinny, and I'm not a particularly big guy, but I was always the big kid at my primary school. And played rugby and things. But yeah, I was also always into slightly nerdier stuff. Like, I liked science fiction and fantasy, and even my friends who I played with, they would also be into a lot of popular music, which I tried to get into but just never really did. And I was never really a big fan of sports or watching sports. So yeah, all the time. And I suppose you kind of embrace it when you do find a friend group who get you tend to embrace it. But yeah, I think even at primary school, I always felt weird and different to the other kids. I think this may be a little bit arrogant, but I was always one of the smarter kids as well, I'd say. Certainly when I got to secondary school, I was in the top sets for other things, whatever that value that means now. But yeah, so I always felt slightly different in that way as well. What about you, Jack? I can imagine you were fairly similar.
Yeah, very, very similar to your experience. Very interested in very niche hobbies very early on. And I guess lucky to be surrounded by mentors and teachers and friends who encouraged pursuing those and took interest in them. I think that's nice, because then it gives you the opportunity to be different and to feel different, but not to feel isolated or to feel on your own, which is quite nice. Because I know I've met a lot of people who have had the inverse experience of feeling, very much like they're trying to fit in all the time, but aren't able to. Whereas I never felt any particular need to fit in.
I'd probably be in the camp of trying to fit in more and not quite succeeding, I'd say, and definitely, feeling out of place a lot of the time. I was going to say something else, then it's completely gone out of my head.
Did you feel that as a kid as well, or is that a later thing?
Yeah. No, I'd say definitely at secondary school. I think probably at primary school, although I don't remember it as well. But yeah, definitely felt I would never say I was always able to go and play football or basketball with friends at lunchtime. Like I was never the weird kid sat by himself, but I did feel a lot of the time when talking to people that I wasn't quite on the same page as them, or never quite felt a part of the inner circle, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I've definitely
in
had
most
that
situations
of like talking to a group of people and being this like, yeah, there's a mismatch here. You know, I think that's actually a pretty common thing as a teenager. It's also that age when like the differences between people become much more obvious.
Yeah.
If you see what I mean? And I don't just mean that in a sort of like gender puberty kind of way. I mean that in a sort of like a social way, and like particular social niches start developing around that time in secondary school a lot more than in primary school.
Yeah. And I'd say, I think one thing for me that perhaps, I know lots of people who still live with their parents or still live in the same town and never want to leave and feel like it is home and always will be home. Whereas I never had that. I feel, and I'm in a temporary rented place now, which, and I realise I've lived here for over 3 years now, and that's the longest I've lived anywhere since I was 18, which is kind of a weird thought, but I still feel more at home here than anywhere else that I've ever really felt. And I think that's kind of played into it a lot for me as well. I'd say I didn't feel like I fit in back where I came from, and I feel like I fit in more now. And that probably is an aspect of maturing and finding the right group of friends and everything. But yeah, that's definitely been a factor for me. And looking back, I think, I don't know, it always was home because it was always the place I always knew. But I don't know. Sorry, this is gonna be a pain to edit because I'm just doing lots of long pauses.
No, that's okay.
But yeah.
What you're saying fits really well with a lot of people I know who are also expats. You know, it's no secret that we're better expats, and we've both got a lot of expat friends. And I think one of those common things about being an expat is moving to a different country gives you a new perspective on yourself, because it's much easier to see the bits of you which are you and the bits of you which are sustained by being in a particular culture, like those particular mannerisms, and it's much easier to separate those things. At least I found that, and I know a lot of my friends have also found that, leaving their home country. So it's almost like by leaving your home country, you sort of get an easier route to discovering yourself.
Yes, definitely.
You know, and what's going on internally, what makes you tick as a person. Yeah,
I think that goes very well back to the original question. Is there's so much. When you're a kid and you're kind of put into a situation where you kind of have to make friends with people because you see them every day and, it's kind of expected, and you're going to be friends with them at school, and you're in a certain place and you have no possible way of leaving, then, the way you are, you always have to act in a certain way in some regards just to make sure you're not a complete social outcast or can't do anything. And then it's only when you leave that place, whether that is going to university or just moving away, and particularly moving out of the country, that you suddenly realize, actually, I don't need to do that anymore. And to an extent as well, just starting to work, is you realize I actually don't need, I can make friends with people because I genuinely like them, not because I'm forced to, or just because they're there, and I can, build friendships based on mutual interests, not, the fact that we live in the same, like our parents chose to live in the same place.
Yeah, and weirdly also, sort of just to come back on the expat thing as well, and the thing you said about people who stay in one village and never leave, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, because it's not like there's no requirement that you have to uproot somewhere else in order to find yourself.
I'd say to an extent I'm jealous of people who felt so comfortable where they grew up and love living where they are, because it just feels like they must be happy and settled with who they are and where they are from a much earlier age, which must be nice. Yeah, like I think it is. I think it is nice. I'm speaking to people like that. Maybe they don't think about it in the same way I think about it, but I think it would be, it's definitely would be nice to have that. And who knows? To each their own, I guess. But I suppose we should leave this with just saying, keep an open mind.
Yeah,
keep an open mind. Don't be afraid to try something new.
That's a nice sentiment to end the podcast on, actually. So,
it is.
Do you want to take us out?
Yeah. Thank you very much for listening to the show. Please subscribe to never miss an episode and rate and review us wherever you have the power to do so. If you'd like to get in touch, we are at Not a Buffalo Pod on Twitter and Instagram, Not a Buffalo Podcast on Facebook, and you can contact us through our website, notabuffalo.wordpress.com. Bye.
Bye.